But now we've frozen.
Where are you?
There I am in the corner.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Today I'd like to introduce Henry Sapoznik. He is an award-winning producer, musicologist, and performer, a writer in the fields of traditional and popular Yiddish and American music and culture. In his teens, was introduced to traditional American music and took up the banjo. In 1972, he co-founded the New York area group, the Delaware Water Gap String Band, and confirmed his reputation as a noted player in both Southern playing styles and classic ragtime banjo. Sapoznik was the founding director of the sound archives of the Hevel Institute for Jewish Research in New York from 1982 to 1995. While there, Sapoznik founded and directed the internationally acclaimed Kleskamp, the Yiddish folk arts program, beginning in 1985 for the next 30 years. A five-time Grammy-nominated producer-performer, has been over 50 records, including having reissued over 30 anthologies of Yiddish jazz, old-time, cantoral, ragtime blues, Italian swing, blackface minstrelsy, and bluegrass recordings. He won the Peabody Award for co-producing the 10-part NPR series, The Yiddish Radio Project, drawn from his collection of over 10,000 items, now part of the American Folklife Center of the Library of Congress. He published two books. The Complete Klezmer in 1982 became the standard tune book for the Klezmer revival, while his I'm sorry, I lost my place. Anyway, in addition to the music, Henry is a competition bullseye pistol shooter and a member of the Wisconsin State Pistol Team and the Roundout Valley, New York team. Please welcome Henry Sapoznik. You have to, let's see, Henry, you have to unmute.
Correct. Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you for unmuting me. Could have used a mute last night if some of you were watching. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you on this area of research that I have been engaged in now for several decades. So let's be comfortable and let's go back to the earliest days of sound recording. While the history of Black Jewish cultural interaction always focuses on how Jews adopted and adapted Black music, ragtime, jazz, swing, rhythm and blues, as performers, promoters, managers, record labels, what has never before been explored were the Blacks who performed Yiddish and cantorial music in the Jewish community, in theaters, on record, and on radio between the two world wars. The first decades of the 20th century saw the rise of African-American synagogues, simultaneously drawing inspiration from Jewish tradition and a Black worldview. What accounts for this rise is manyfold. Jim Crow laws, which supplanted Reconstruction in the South, drove a northern migration. A demographic shift, which in New York brought African Americans to the already established Jewish community in Harlem. By World War I, Harlem boasted the second largest Jewish community in the country. Blacks were now encountering Jews as neighbors, employers, inspirations, customers, and rivals. Simultaneously, Black national aspirations grew and drew inspiration from Zionism itself, a Back to Africa movement, as a model. Now, let's go to, go to this. And here we are. Aha, good. Are you gonna, why is it not? Yes, okay. Unaffiliated and unaccepted by the Jewish religious establishment, the congregations were for the most part small and poor, meeting in a storefront or a house. What similarly sized Orthodox congregations would call a shtibel, a little house. They constructed a crazy quilt of traditional Jewish practices, life cycle events, modesty of dress, kashrus, dietary laws, separate seating, etc., plus rituals which reflect the unique African-American worldview. Services were for the most part in Hebrew, with some congregations conversant fluent in Yiddish. Vestigial remnants of these Jewish-inspired congregations still exist today in everything from Chicago's prestigious Beth Shalom B'nai Tzakin Ethiopian Hebrew congregation to derivative fringe Black Hebrew groups and even the anti-Semitic Nation of Islam. Interestingly, many of the founders of African-American synagogues were not American-born. Some came from the Caribbean, others claimed Abyssinia with its unbroken Black identification with Old Testament Hebrews, and giving modest bragging rights to their existential claims. The surprisingly large percentage of Caribbean Blacks with a predisposition to Judaism might point to the possible Jewish slaveholders who, like Christians, had slaves who converted to the owner's religion. Among the period Black synagogues were the Moorish Zionist Temple, Rabbi Mordechai Herman, and that's on the left, arm raised with wearing the tallis, who claimed direct Ethiopian lineage for himself and his congregants. And according to American Black Israelite scholar Jacob Dorman, he was a member of the Marcus Garvey movement. The Commandment Keepers, Ethiopian Hebrew congregation, founded in 1919 by Rabbi Wentworth Arthur Matthew. That's the picture on the right. A West Indian immigrant who would establish a network of synagogues in the US and the Caribbean based on traditional Orthodox Ashkenazi traditions. There was also Congregation Beth B'nai Abraham, founded by the Barbados-born Rabbi A. Arnold Josiah Ford, who would found his synagogue in 1929 as an outgrowth of his right-hand work also with Marcus Garvey. He came to Harlem in 1909 and, given an interest in music and social uplift, joined the progressive Black music organization, the Clef Club, run by pioneering musician James Reese Europe. Another member of the Clef Club was Harlem Stride pianist Willie the Lion Smith, born William Henry Joseph Bonaparte Bettelhoff, 1897 to 1973, who throughout his life actively proclaimed his Jewish provenance. In the opening of his 1964 memoir, Music on My Mind, Smith pays homage to his Jewish father, his youthful years in Newark, New Jersey, and Jewish neighbors, the Rothschilds, in a story which actually closely mirrors the childhood experiences of Louis Armstrong, for example, the intervention of a supportive Jewish family. The Rothschilds allowed Smith to not only receive religious instruction from a local rabbi alongside their own children, but the rabbi took great pains with him when he saw how receptive Smith was in preparation for his bar mitzvah, by teaching him the vast literature of cantorial modes, tropes, and articulations. To quote Smith, "You could say I am partly Jewish by origin and partly by association. As it turned out, I favored the Jewish religion all my life, and at one time served as a Hebrew cantor in a Harlem congregation." In a recent email, Dean of Jazz Historians Dan Morgenstern offered another perspective on the Lions' Black Jewish culture crossing. To quote, "While I got to know Willie quite well, he was evasive about the extent of his cantorial activities. And I never heard him sing anything approaching it or say or sing anything in Hebrew. His Yiddish, however, was fluent, and he set witty lyrics to 'I Found a New Baby' that I wish he had recorded. His sing-songy vocalizing had a definite Jewish tinge. "I'm no authority on Yiddish," he said, though my father was. And so my little trumpeter friend, Nat Lorber, who certified the Lion's Yiddish to me. They sometimes conversed. It's not surprising then that in tandem with the rise of Black synagogues, there would be a concomitant rise of those who served the synagogue, among them cantors. But what would have ordinarily been a sheltered in-group community function did, in the wake of vaudeville, Yiddish theater, and expanding popular culture, become a full-fledged, if short-lived, cultural phenomenon. The fact is, cantorial singing had already briskly migrated out of the synagogue and onto the secular stage, thanks in no small part to the giddy excitement brought about by commercial sound recordings. From 1900 to 1942, nearly 40% of all American Jewish 78s were of cantorial singing, the largest percentage of any Jewish music genre. That we even know anything about the diversity of Black cantors in the 1920s is thanks to journalist and essayist Shimon Rubinsohn of the Yiddische Togblatt, the Jewish Daily News, who, in his weekly column von Groß New York, from Big New York, produced a series of pithy feuilleton, well-observed portraits of local Jewish life. In his June 28, 1920 column entitled Mendel, der Schwarze Chasen, pictured on the left, Rubinsohn tells of arriving in his office to a young Black man waiting to speak to him. He introduced himself as Mendel, a press agent for Kessler's Theater, a popular Yiddish stage on the Lower East Side, and was looking for a plug in Rubinsohn's column for their new show, which featured Mendel's specialty, singing Yiddish songs and cantorial prayers. Asked for a demonstration, Mendel launched into the industrial strength Yiddish showstopper, a Chazendel auf Shabbos, a cantor on the Sabbath, a demanding pyrotechnical mix of ornate cantorial melismas and snappy barn-burning theatricality. He sings with a real Yiddish turn, Rubinsohn marveled, with a real Yiddish moan and sigh. The old-time Jewish trope is there, and really Jewish. Make no mistake, Rubinsohn assured his readers. Until now, we've only had a Jewish Black, Al Jolson, a cantor son who makes believe he is Black. But here is a Black man who is a cantor and calls himself Mendel, der Schwarze Chasen. Rubinsohn comments on Mendel's reiner Yiddish, his punctilious Yiddish, and about his birth in the Barbados, his coming to America around 1910, and his eventual migration to the Yiddish theater, concluding, "Here is Mendel, der Schwarze Chasen, a non-Jew, a Black who offers up no name other than Mendele, but who is a real cantor here in Groesel, New York." Happy holiday, trumpets Rubinsohn in a column a few months later on September 20th. We have another Black cantor in New York, entitled David del Kalristra Hakoyen del Falash, pictured on the right. Rubinsohn introduces us to the Jewish Kalskrite, which Rubinsohn translate as a calligrapher. From the Ethiopian port city of Massawa, who claimed to know 29 languages and who, in a wide-ranging conversation which toggled effortlessly between Yiddish and Hebrew, offered a whirlwind narrative about being educated in Paris and Palestine, studying under a cantor in Russia as a meshoirel, an apprentice cantor, marrying a Jewish woman in Pinsk and fathering 2 children, and doing translation work for the US Army during World War I to study to become a cantor. Rubinsohn was curious. What did his parents say about his marriages? They were horrified, he said. They said it was a shanda. As his parents said, the real Jews of old were all brown or Black. White Jews are not real Jews. They're just fakers. A notice in the June 1921 edition of Variety notes that David HaKohen, now David Cole, has embarked on the Yiddish vaudeville stage, singing both Yiddish songs and cantorial hymns, and showing off his skill in 28 languages. These and other Black cantors would appear in the pages of Yiddish and African newspapers of the day, but only one, billed simply as Der Schwarze Chasen, would be instantaneously identifiable to Yiddish theater audiences in the 1920s, Thomas LaRue Jones. An imperfect portrait of Thomas LaRue emerges from the over 150 period articles, reviews, and advertisements which I found in mainstream African American and Yiddish newspapers. Take, for example, his name. In some places, he's Thomas LaRue. In others, Thomas LaRue. In Yiddish, LaRue is transcribed and there's no capital letters. He's also billed as Thomas LaRue Jones, or conversely, Thomas Jones LaRue, but never Thomas Jones. Then there were his stage names. Reb Toivia HaKoyen, Reb, the informal salutation in short for rabbi, but without implying religious ordination. Toivia, one of the many endearments attributed to Moses, and HaKoyen, implying descent from the priestly Kohanim in the temple at Jerusalem. LaRue was also billed as Toivele, a popular honorific nicknamed beloved Cantors. Yet despite that dizzying array of names, it is his ubiquitous Der Schwarze Chasen, which reflects how he was billed and how the Yiddish theatrical public instantly knew him. Yet as the commercial press more and less accurately tracked his professional trajectory, outside of several unsubstantiated passing references to his singing in a Harlem synagogue, we know very little about his personal life. He seems not to have been part of a Black community or synagogue, and not possibly even a white one. For that matter, nowhere is LaRue shown to be affiliated with a synagogue. LaRue then would seem to have been a part of and apart from the white Ashkenazic world whose culture he internalized. Though there's uncertainty about his personal life, one thing is clear: LaRue's association with Newark, New Jersey. In the April 8, 1922 African-American newspaper, The New York Age, columnist Lucien H. White introduces his readers to LaRue as a young Negro whose mother accepted the religious beliefs of the Hebrews and raised up her son in that way. He quotes LaRue, "It began with my mother. She lived in Newark, and when she found race prejudice there to be very strong, she could make friends only with Jewish women, preferring the company of Jews to Christians." White notes that LaRue's mother, undoubtedly a single mother, as no mention of a father is made, insisted he receive a traditional Jewish school education in a Talmud Torah, and that he and his sister should both be able to pray from a siddur and a machzor. Despite her allegiance to Jewish forms and customs, it is not clear if LaRue's mother converted to Judaism, despite LaRue saying he had a bar mitzvah at the proper age. One anecdote about LaRue, which was repeated so often, it has burnished the patina of a cultural creation myth, concerns a Sabbath service he attended as a young boy. During the service, the cantor was taken ill. So LaRue quickly put on a prayer shawl, and before the congregation could orient himself, took to the lectern and in his soprano voice began to intone the prayers. The congregation was ready to storm the podium to take him down, but he sang with such great feeling that they remained standing and began praying. Despite never intending a life of professional entertainment, LaRue received an offer from a concert manager who signed him for a tour of provincial Yiddish vaudeville circuit. One perspective on LaRue comes from a sniffy, unsigned editorial in the December 27th, 1923 issue of The American Israelite, a middle-of-the-road conservative publication in Cincinnati. "There can exist no doubt as to the Catholicity of the Yiddish public," they wrote. "For some time, as is well known, the singing of a Negro chazan has been something of a rage in Yiddish circles." A piece of LaRue's vaudeville show is highlighted in a September 15th, 1921 Harrisburg Telegraph review, which describes LaRue, quote, and a white cantor, who between the acts will have a challenge. The challenge being the cantorial version of the jazz Trading Eights, in which increasingly ornate and dazzling improvised vocal riffs are passed back and forth. Upon LaRue's return to New York, he was signed by producers Goldberg and Jacobs to appear in their play De Schuppenkleed, pictured on the left, The Wedding Dress, at their new Lenox Theater, located at the corner of Lenox Avenue and 111th Street in the heart of Harlem. The decision to hire LaRue was both a canny business decision and an expansive gesture acknowledging the shifting demographics in the uptown Black Jewish enclave. And while it is unclear just how many Black patrons attended the LaRue performances, the nightly packed houses attest to LaRue's draw and presence in the Jewish community. The Schuppenkleed was the first of Goldberg and Jacobs' 1-2 punch featuring LaRue, whose premiere appearance was backed by a multi-voiced Newark-based boys choir. And here it reads on the Yiddish, a giant concert by world-renowned Black cantor with a large Newark-based choir under the leadership of the renowned Jewish choir director Joseph Germansky. LaRue will astound Harlem with his amazing singing and the finest compositions from Reb Yossele Rosenblatt, Gershon Sirota, and Kvartin. Goldberg and Jacobs' next show was based on a popular long-running Yiddish newspaper series by humorist B. Kovno about a no-nonsense, gives as good as she gets Jewish woman, Yente Telebende. That's the poster on the right. This play, partly fueled by LaRue's featured appearance, would turn out to be an even bigger hit than Schuppenkleed, ending up in one of the longest-running shows in the history of the Yiddish theater. As in the Schuppenkleed, where an entire sequence was constructed around him, in Yente Telebende, LaRue had complete command of his featured turn. Theater scribe Z. Barnblit of Der Morgenjournal, the Morgan Journal, in a November 4th, 1921 feature called Have You Heard of the Famous Cantor Reb Teuvele? Describes how he sat slack-jawed through LaRue's performance. Barnblit describes LaRue's entrance. There he was, a slender Black youth in a black frock coat and vest under which he wore a crisp white shirt. One who came out singing a Yiddish song, a song beginning even before he stepped out on stage. I could not believe my eyes and ears. And LaRue's ending with the warhorse, Ailey Ailey. When I hear at a concert that someone will sing Ailey Ailey, it could be the best singer in the world, I run in the opposite direction as if cornered by a well-known pest dragging a steamer trunk full of exhausted, moth-eaten anecdotes from decades past. This, however, was a new Ailey Ailey, a Black cantor who was so very heartfelt and which drew so deeply from Jewish martyrdom, the Jewish cry, begging God, why has he forsaken him? And producing from this song what even the greatest opera singers could not. Every person in the theater was transfixed by the Black cantor's powerful poetic harmony. After the concert, Barnblit sat with LaRue and spoke about his mother's fierce devotion to Yiddishkeit and how it became his fierce devotion too, and how he toured the provincial Jewish vaudeville circuit, billed as one of the Black Jews of India, while no one suspected he was simply an American Negro. LaRue's show-stopping turn in Yente Telebende caused such a stir that Barnblit's review was soon carried in Europe, in Das Neue Leben, the New Life, a Yiddish newspaper in Białystok, Poland, and setting in motion LaRue's international reputation. LaRue's show, in addition to the stage, LaRue was a pioneering New York radio artist. Starting in 1923 LaRue appeared on the recently launched Newark radio station WOR, billed as the Colored Cantor, singing Yiddish, Russian, and cantorial hymns. In 1929, as part of another connection to LaRue, as he notes in the first posting, LaRue's name was seen across a wide variety of concerts, both on the air, in concert halls, and in synagogue concerts, though not in front of a congregation. Now, let's take one of the most interesting parts is that LaRue is the only Black cantor of that period to have actually recorded. And I want to go on a parallel trip to talk about this recording. It started when I was doing research in the 1970s for a multi-volume work called Ethnic Music on Records, a listing of every foreign language recording made in the United States between 1895 and 1945. The LaRue entry turned up during the research at CBS, which then owned Columbia Records. And Columbia had purchased the OK record label, which is for whom LaRue recorded. First, let's take a look at this piece of sheet music from 1920. This is a Yiddish song, which, as it turns out, was co-composed by a man named Shalom Sekunda, who is perhaps best known for his 1932 composition by Mir Bist Du Shein. But this was the beginning of Sekunda's career as a composer. This piece of sheet music, as it turns out, was what they called a vanity. This was paid for by LaRue himself. It's unclear whether he commissioned the song by Sekunda or the publisher did that for him. The copyright date of 1920 puts LaRue firmly, as it notes, in Newark. So we know that he was a local performer. And if the 1902 birth date is one of the few genealogical links I've been able to find, if that 1902 birth date is correct, this is an 18-year-old Thomas LaRue who published this Yiddish song. So this is, LaRue probably came to record this song, this record, for the OK record label because of their presence, having studios and offices in Newark. This label, a very handsome label, mostly for the Jewish records on OK, features the Statue of Liberty motif. Interestingly, and not unsurprisingly, the Yiddish copy, Idele verlier nit dein Hoffnung, is not translated into English. It just transliterates it into Idele verlier nit dein Hoffnung. And though it has his name in Yiddish, it does not translate Der Schwarze Chasen. Der Schwarze Chasen is only in Yiddish. So we'll now take a listen to both sides of this song, of this record, first with Idele verlier nit dein Hoffnung. Why?
Der Jid wird kein Mol, nicht werden verloren, wie Sand bei dem Jahr, wird sich mehren, in Völkern und Fach, in Himmel die Sterne, in Mut ist geworden, in dem Jid der Goya der Säune macht im Pogromen, sein Blut auf den Fließen, fing wie in Stromen. verbittert sein Leben als Reck. In der Luft war ihm alles weg. Der Feinde dahin, har gedeint in der Hof so verletzt, ich will mit rein. Ich schon noch abon, wie Jerusalem.
Oops. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I was trying to switch screens. Whoops. Wait. All right. Technical. Okay. Okay. Sorry about.
You're good now?
This should. Sorry. Okay. There we go. Oops. Darn. Sorry about this. Oh, exactly what I didn't want to happen. Okay. I can't move it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm trying to. I'm just going to let it play.
Goja der Säune macht im Pogrommen sein Blut auf zu fließen, ich will ihn strömen. Men verbittert sein Leben als Reck. In der Luft war ihm alles weg. Der Feinde dahin, har gedeint in der Hof so verletzt, ich will mit rein. Ich schon noch abon, wie Jerusalem. Verlier nun nicht dein Hoffnung redit, es wird am Muldir, euer Freund. Haravo Marina Mulek, was gelernt mit dem Mulek, war nicht ihr Schrecken, dass ich kein Mulnit. Arunter ist auch nicht einmal, bin Feuerland, ist sie euer sein Preis. Verlier nur nicht dein Hoffnung redit. Verlier nur nicht dein Hoffnung redit. Es wird am Muldir euer Freund. Haravo Marina Mulek, was ihr lernt mit dem Mulek. Seht ihr Schrecken, dass ich kein Mulnit. Wir setzen dich bekommen in dem Wahnsinn morgen oben. Verlier nur nicht dein Hoffnung redit.
This most unapologetic listing of historic tormentors of the Jews and the blunt invocation of Jewish blood bought cheap is simultaneously a throwback to the earliest seedling days of the Yiddish theater, a half century before, with the street singing shtetl griot, the Brodersingel, and also a leap ahead as a Yiddish corollary to another Jewish composition against racist violence, with the powerful African American Association, talking about Abel Meerpol's 1937 Strange Fruit and its unforgettable Billie Holiday interpretation. The corollary to Strange Fruit is chilling, given the backdrop of when Jeder verliert nicht deine Hoffnung was written and published. 1920 saw the continuation of murder of African Americans for over 50 lynchings, while in Poland, called out in the song for its deadly pogroms, saw its most recent anti-Jewish violence in the city of Zamość, with multiple pogrom-related murders. Given the narrow swath of subjects African Americans could make on a commercial recordings, it's pretty clear that LaRue could make assertions in Yiddish, which he could not do in English as a Black man. For the cantorial side of the recording, LaRue chose not one of the barn burner titles, such as Kol Nidre, from the high visibility high holidays, but a modest prayer of supplication from the daily morning Shachris service. Mizratze berachmit, become favorable through compassion. The prayer is part of the Tachnun prayers at the supplication. We fall on our face as we say these prayers as a way of physically enacting what we hope to be doing inwardly, submitting ourselves to the divine. On Mizratze berachmim, LaRue begins in the quieter head tone, but switches into his resonant chest voice midway on the significant words, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, melding messenger and message and catapulting the quotidian prayer to its powerful conclusion.
tuo cor. E dopo
This Thomas LaRue recording is both a great recording and an important one. It's great because it stands on its own merits when compared to the other better-known period Jewish recordings of the same genre. And it is great because it accurately transports us to the creative foment of the moment and shows the elasticity of Jewish eclecticism and the porous cultural parameters of neighboring communities. The recording is important because it successfully and triumphantly stands in for the muted voices of the other Schwarze Chazonim, who were once a part of a fully formed, freestanding phenomenon, but who never stood before a recording microphone. If the teeterboard life and career of Thomas LaRue proves anything, it's that even with the goodwill of an accepting broad audience, being a Black cantor was a difficult and uncertain undertaking at best. One then wonders, could there have been an even more difficult and even more uncertain undertaking for an African American to ply in a meaningful musical dynamic with the Jewish community? And for that, we come to Goldele, the Schwarze Chazenke. Here, to fully appreciate the enormity of the brief meteoric rise of Goldie, the Schwarze Chazenke, it's critical to understand the numerous impediments she was forced to overcome in order to become Goldie, the Schwarze Chazenke. On the one hand, she had to contend with the same racial and social restrictions which the male Black cantors were forced to endure. But being a woman who chose to sing chazonis also exposed Goldie to issues within Orthodox Jewry. The phrase kol isha, voice of a woman, is the historical term which denotes that a woman's singing voice is an inappropriate expression, an erva, for men to whom she is not related. This led to the tradition of separate synagogue seating for women, where their voices and prayers could not be heard by men. Had Goldie even wanted to pursue a career or a life in the synagogue, it would not have even been possible until the 1970s. It was the birth of the Yiddish theater in the 1880s which liberated women from the strictures of Kol Isha, creating a secular performance place for them alongside men. The Yiddish theater and the subsequent outlets of vaudeville, recording, and radio led to a phalanx of women cantors singing in the traditional male style, starting also in 1920 with Madame Sophie Kurtzer. Why women would take on music form from which they could not realize its true context is a question which is not answered through any of the period anecdotes which we have. The Jewish Criterion in Pittsburgh gave an in-depth promotion of a series of concerts Goldie gave there in March 9th of 1925. Goldie, the colored cantor, her life reads like a story from 1001 Nights. Goldie, one of the most beautiful women in all of Africa, was born in Abyssinia 28 years ago. Once a tribal chief met her at the mines, and after hearing her sing, his interest was so great that he sent her to Milan, Italy to cultivate her voice. Goldie is a member of the Jewish tribe known as Sheba of Giza. They are a tribe of colored Jews in Africa. When Goldie returned from her studies in Italy, the song she sang on stages in Africa, as well as the synagogue of her own people. Goldie sings in 6 languages: Hebrew, Yiddish, Russian, German, French, and English. Goldie is a linguist, a poet, and a composer. She is now visiting America for the first time in these concerts. To date, no genealogical evidence has emerged, so this remains a mystery. but the assertion that she was the sensation of the New York Yiddish stage is unfortunately not shown. In a startling transition in late 1926, she appears as Goldie M. Steiner, her apparent actual surname, in the controversial David Belasco Broadway production of Lulubelle. A mixed-race Carmen in Harlem, the play was built around white actress Lenore Ulrich, famous for playing exotics. One part of the controversy is made clear by an abashed anonymous scribe in Variety who pointed out that even a not-so-careful watching of the mixed-race cast reveals that at no time do those of the opposite color mix on stage. The questionable atmosphere of a lot of colored people in a white playwright's blaspheming and slandering a weaker minority race for the glory of an ignorant, prejudiced white minority, wrote the anonymous scribe for the black paper, the Pittsburgh Courier. When the show closed, Goldie returned to regional Yiddish touring as Goldele de Schwarze Chazente. She then turns up again on Broadway on April 28th in a play called Hymn by poet E.E. Cummings. The modernist experiment play was met with devastatingly bad reviews. Weird, unusual drama, wrote the reviewer for the Daily News, who walked out. Nevertheless, like other reviewers who panned the show, Goldie was celebrated for her featured performance of the murder ballad Frankie and Johnny. John French Sloan, one of the founders of the so-called Ashcan School of Painting, attended one of the 27 performances of him and rendered this etching of Goldie's Frankie and Johnny performance, surrounded, as it says, by a masked corps of assistants who sing and dance. In late April of 1923, a local human interest story in New York press posted by the wire services caught many newspapers' interest around the country. The Day in New York describes an Easter service of Bowery hooligan turned colorful Christian evangelical preacher Tom Noonan, the self-proclaimed Bishop of Chinatown, at his rescue mission, Cathedral of the Underworld, in a former Doyers Street opium den. The article describes the colorful scene. Behind Tom Noonan on the stage, they saw a jazz orchestra, a volunteer choir, a portly negress, a Japanese, a Jew, 3 cornet players, and a song leader and a stooge. It went on. The negress turned out to be Goldie Mae Steiner, student of Hebrew and the only colored woman cantor in America. She sang the great Jewish lament and then sat down and joined lustily in Onward Christian Soldiers. Starting in 1933 until the show went off the air, Goldie Mae Steiner was the Jewish music regular on Noonan's Sunday afternoon Cathedral of the Underworld WMCA program, listed here on the left. The show would lose its slot in late 1938 to the syndicated programs of Nazi provocateur Father Charles Coughlin. Despite the Christian context of the Cathedral of the Underworld, Noonan regularly featured Jewish holiday segments and guests and explains why it was included in the broadcast listings of Yiddish newspapers. The final notice about Goldie Mae Steiner is from a 1938 benefit concert at the Brooklyn Academy of Music for the African American civil rights organization, the Urban League, which featured Goldie, here misspelled as Millie, alongside Duke Ellington and Fats Waller. Sadly, this is the last notice we have of Goldie Mae Steiner. Yet, unlike the promotional ballyhoo around Thomas LaRue and the other male African-American cantors, who were billed as the only colored cantors in America, that was not true then or now. But the assertion that Goldie M. Steiner was the only colored woman cantor in America was true then and still remains true now, even with the current robust outpouring of women cantors. Today, with the change in demographics in the Jewish world, Black cantors are no longer an oddity, but the continuity from this generation to today was not had. The continuation of these pioneering individuals who created a platform for themselves to entertain and uplift the Jewish community was until recently undiscovered and unreported. It's hoped now that this lost moment of Jewish and Black interaction can be brought back to the fore and show what a dynamic cultural interaction these two powerful communities were able to take on. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. So now I think, are we open for questions? Would you like to take some questions, Henry? Does anyone have questions?
I'll be happy to.
Okay. So Simon has a question, but
Oh, let me put on my headphones so I can hear
okay.
this a little better.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I came a little late. It was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
What I did not hear, I came in at about 20 minutes. Were any of these people, any of these chazanim, born Jewish in the kind of traditional sense?
There's no genealogical, so far there is no genealogical materials which point to their being Jewish. There's anecdotal evidence that turns up in some of the articles. The thing that is clear is that even if they were not Jewish, technically, if you listen to those recordings of both the Yiddish song and the chazonis, it's clear that Thomas LaRue came up in a very deep Jewish soundscape, that he was surrounded by people who could speak Yiddish and Hebrew. His pronunciation is impeccable, and his tonal abilities show that he was in direct contact with the carriers of the tradition. So, so far, there's no evidence that they were technically Jewish, but they were culturally for sure.
And I hear that too. I appreciate that. I could hear that. The other question I have is how is it that you started this kind of research? And it's a fascinating topic. How did this start for you?
Well, I alluded to back in the 1970s, I was working on, I was the assistant to a man named Dick Spotswood, who is what's called a discographer. He studies sound recordings, writes the history of sound recordings, and he was compiling the first listing of all foreign language records made in the United States from 1897 to 1955. And I was heading the Jewish part. I mean, he was doing Greek and Spanish and Hawaiian. And it's there that I found in the recording ledgers of what was OK Records, which eventually was bought by Columbia, which became CBS. The OK Record recording ledgers, that is what the engineers wrote down during the recording session, it listed Thomas LaRue, der Schwarze Chazen.
Mm-hmm.
And it would then take 40 years until a few months ago till I actually found the record. It's the longest I've ever searched for a record in my entire life.
And are there other people doing this research? This kind of work?
I don't think so.
Fascinating.
Thank you.
Have you called YIVO or talked to anybody at YIVO? Because,
I was the sound archivist at YIVO from
Okay.
1982 to 1995.
okay,
And in fact, the record turned up in the collection that I started after I left YIVO. So it's kind of interesting that I found it in the collection that I founded. So yes, YIVO is critically involved.
so my husband is the Simon, my name is Debbie, and he sent a lot of old Yiddish records that my in-laws had to YIVO 5 or 6 years ago. So anyway, just an aside. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There was a question from Marilyn Wiley Fiddler. She says, I didn't know there were Black congregations back in the 1920s. Is it possible the Cantors were products of these congregations, grew up in them, and started singing and chanting?
I'm sorry. That was unaware that there were Black congregations, and then what?
Is it possible the Cantors were products of these congregations, grew up in them, and started singing and chanting?
It's possible. I'm still waiting for the two Black Cantors for whom I have the largest materials. That is Goldie Steiner and Thomas LaRue. In none of the press information that I was able to find in the research, none of them pointed to their being affiliated with a Black congregation. While it's possible that some were, I haven't been able to get all of the facts to line up with the supposition that they did come up doing this.
Harriet Schneider has a question. Are you familiar with the Ethiopian Fellowship? This cantor was from Abyssinia. I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly. My grandpa had records from Cantor Yosela Rosenblatt that I recall, and I saw the name of the show, Yenti Talabend. I was surprised to learn of Negro cantors. That was from Harriet. Harriet, would you like to say something?
Yes, I don't know of any Negro cantors. This is the first I've heard. I've heard of the Falasha in Ethiopia. That's the only ones that are native-born, Negro Jews. Is Abyssinia near Ethiopia? I don't know the relationship, but that's the first I've heard of another African area where there were Jewish people.
Actually, Abyssinia is Ethiopia. It was the historic name of Ethiopia into the 20th century. After World War I, the name was became more popularly known as Ethiopia.
So, was she a Felashim?
She claims to have been Abyssinian birth, but again, that's anecdotal. So I think it was assumed that by claiming to be Abyssinian, she was, because of the place of the Queen of Sheba and the connection of. So the assumption that I'm making is that she made a claim to this provenance in order to heighten her viability as a performer. Whether it's actually true or not, I think it's possibly doubtful insofar as her appearances on the American stage, including her performance of the song Frankie and Johnny, which is one of the most critical American murder ballads of the 19th and 20th century, would not have worked as well with someone who had a foreign accent. What makes that song and the whole history behind it is its roots in the Black culture of New Orleans. So it's possible that her claiming to be, she did not use the term Falasha. It was not in use, in widespread use at the time, but her claim to have been of Abyssinian birth may have just been a publicity stunt, as opposed to something which really, I mean, hopefully the research will turn up and I will be proven wrong, and no one will be happier than me that I'm wrong. So, that's
one more thing. This Cantor Yossela Rosenblatt, my grandpa had 78 records of his. I remember Yenta Talabende. I remember some songs. It brings me back. I didn't realize that these people sang it like from the Jewish theater, I suppose, at the same time. Is it in the 30s maybe, or?
much earlier. In fact, Yossela Rosenblatt was a fan of Thomas LaRue because I didn't have the time to point it out, but a number of LaRue's vocalizations, some of his characteristic ways that he uses to phrase the words, were taken directly from Rosenblatt recordings. So Rosenblatt was extremely influential.
He was a beautiful singer. Beautiful.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marilyn, did you have something more?
Yes. In today's world, would these cantors be considered cantors, or would they be considered cantorial soloists? Because cantors now go through a huge amount of training and graduate as cantors. So would they be more cantorial soloists?
Well, back then, there was no such thing as the Jewish Theological Seminary giving out degrees. Hebrew Union College wasn't doing it, Yeshiva University. What LaRue did was the traditional system of learning the entire Steger, learning the entire structure of the cantorial literature by ear. And I can attest to this. My late father, Oliver Sholem, was the last of the Ravna. He was the last cantor of the city of Cantors from Ravna, Poland. And I used to sing with him in the 1950s and 60s in the Borscht Belt, in the hotels. And because my father was not a great music reader, I had to do what he did. And I had to learn the entire liturgy by ear. And this was all of the variations for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Pesach. And so that was the old method. These days, you don't need to have graduated from a Jewish, a theological seminary. The Chazonim in the Orthodox community, in the Hasidic community, don't graduate. If you know how to sing, if you know the Stego, if you can basically stay on tune and show up when the davening begins, you got the gig. Thank you.
Time for one more question, and Susan Blake.
Yeah, I'm here. I taught some book, and I cannot remember because it goes back too long ago, in Denver, Colorado, in a Jewish day school. And they were talking about, one of the things we learned was that when they did DNA testing of Ethiopian Jews who professed to be Jewish, the people that called themselves the Kohanim actually had DNA that matched the DNA of the traditionally white people from Europe.
Wow, that's not out of the question. Not out of the question. I'm still hoping, like I said, I would love to be able to find more genealogical material on these performers to see where they're buried. So possibly that will tell me something. Are they in a Jewish cemetery? Are they in a general cemetery? The fact that this cultural stuff exists at all is so amazing that the other research, and it's not surprising that it's going to take more time. But I wouldn't be surprised.
Henry, I think we're gonna about wrap it up for today. Thank you so, so very much for your presentation today. It was wonderful, and I want to just thank you and hope maybe we can have you back again someday. So appreciate it, much appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yoshiko.
Thank you.
Thank you.